Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. Ukraine War News Update. The second part thereof for the 26th of March 2024. Let's get straight to the military aid and equipment segment. We have French aid to Ukraine saying about France that 600 AAS bombs will be produced in 2024 and 1,200 in 2025. 100 units will be supplied to Ukraine by the end of March. Now, these are the hammer bombs that we've heard. We've actually seen Ukrainian planes loaded with these, so we know that they're using them. And this was the bomb that France have declared Ukraine will receive 50 of a month to the tune of 600 eventually. So that's a year's worth of 50 a month. I don't know if this is another consignment of these weapons or whether this is part of that already. 600 will be produced in 2024. Sounds exactly like the 50 a month. And 100 will be supplied by the end of March, would be like 50 last month, 50 this month. So I don't know. But this is the important part. MBDA will supply 40 Scalp-EG cruise missiles. So we have not heard that MBDA has been given extra orders of either the Storm Shadow or the Scalp-EG, the French version of the Storm Shadow, and orders of Taurus either. So that 40 Scalp-EG, the French cruise missile, have been ordered. That is significant indeed. There's a question below to French aid saying, big and good news, newly produced Scalp-EG, since they are from MBDA, right? Yep, it seems so. So it seems that these are new orders of those cruise missiles ordered and paid for by the French. So anyway, that is significant. 200 Aster missiles have been ordered for nearly $2 billion as well, euros as well. So Aster missiles are air defense missiles too. So this is really significant. Over 400 pieces of equipment have been supplied by KNDS to Ukraine. That's a French defense company that's working with the Germans to set up, also, as it says here, plan to establish subsidiaries in Ukraine. There will be discussions on the adaptation of the AASM bombs to F-16 jets. So these hammer bombs that we've seen on the bottom of MiG-29s, I think it was, talk about them being adapted to F-16s, which would be really good. France, Denmark and Ukraine are financing 78 Caesar self-propelled howitzers, which you know about, which will soon be delivered to Ukraine. Fantastic. I don't know about soon. I know that they're producing them and working really hard to get them ready, but I doubt it's going to be a case of, we just built 78. That's going to be over the course of some time. France will produce 100,000 full-shot 155mm ammunition in 2024, which we knew about. I reported that. 80,000 of those will go to Ukraine. 20,000 will be for France. Additional VAB, those are armored personnel carriers, and AMX-10, these are the light tanks or reconnaissance tank things on wheels, will be delivered to Ukraine. So more of those on the way. So France possibly stepping up a little bit, but the important parts of Scalp-EGs there. Minister of Foreign Affairs Dmitry Kuleba has discussed with EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, Josep Borrell, the possibilities of strengthening Ukraine's air defense systems and additional systems such as Patriot as soon as possible. He was declaring, as you heard in the last video, that in fact, where do we have that here? He has said, give us the damn Patriots to Politico. If we had enough air defense systems, namely Patriots, we'd be able to protect not only the lives of our people, but also the economy from destruction. And, I fully kind of agree with that. Yeah, it might seem a little bit aggressive, but I think it's a sign of desperation. And also getting tired of receiving irritated remarks from Germany about whether they will provide Taurus, given the pretty dodgy excuses for not providing Taurus. Anyway, working with the EU to make sure that air defense is improved in Ukraine. That's significant. Right, German aid to Ukraine then says, as Russia has intensified its attacks on Ukrainian cities recently, I'd like to remind you that according to Rheinmetall Italia CEO, Germany will deliver another Skynex air defense system to Ukraine this month. And this is the system that is basically like the new version of Geopol that fires just huge amounts of lead into the air type thing, and is pretty effective. But the Ukrainian Air Force is also expecting another Iris SLM air defense system from Germany at practically any moment, according to the former spokesperson Yuri Ignat. P.S. There is a possibility that both air defense systems were already delivered to Ukraine, but just hadn't been officially confirmed yet. Statements made by both officials in January 2024. Well, this could be on the. I don't know, where do we have that? I'm sure I have that lined up. Basically, I'm going to have to go and find that. Basically, it's a tab before. I just skipped a tab. Right. Zelensky said last night. So the main news today is something we've all been waiting for and working on for months on various levels. 2 more air defense systems have arrived in Ukraine. Are they the ones we just heard about? Like the Iris-T SLM, which is a short range, SLM, that's a medium range air defense system, and the Skynex, or is it 2 more Patriots? We know that they're waiting for Patriot batteries from Raytheon, although it's RTX now, ordered directly from Ukraine. It could be that. Who knows? Naturally, all details should be not made public, but these are the systems capable of intercepting everything. Okay, that seems like Patriots. That would be amazing. We will protect regions. There are not enough systems, not yet enough systems in place to fully protect Ukraine, but we are working on it every day. And go back to what the discussion is with Joseph Borrell. I am grateful to our partners who have helped us strengthen Ukraine's air defense and protect lives. So imagine if they got 2 Patriot systems, Iris-T SLM and a Skynex. That'd be fantastic, right? But they need so many more because they also need to use them offensively in terms of moving them close to the front lines. Yes, it's risky, but my goodness, the Russians are able to use their airframes with impunity to drop those guided glide bombs at the moment. Too much. And so the Russians need to be threatened in the air. Right. Congress, the US Congress approved $300 million. So if you remember the other day, I reported that $300 million worth of kind of wasn't quite presidential drawdown. I think, well, anyway, we'll talk about exactly where it came from. $300 million to arm Ukraine late last week. There's just one problem. The money is already gone, according to Politico. The cash was included in $1.2 trillion government funding package, but the money was actually obligated in November. This is a bit of a challenge, that the idea that they've given them this money, but actually it's already been spent. So while its passage might have marked a brief bipartisan win, it was essentially a symbolic move. The $300 million, quote, is not available for us to use now, said the official, who was granted anonymity to discuss the dynamics of the budget. The Security Assistance Initiative puts money toward contracts for future deliveries of munitions and equipment for Ukraine. The Pentagon broadcast said it had depleted the account months ago, noting that a $300 million support package in November, quote, exhausts the remaining USAI funds currently available to support Ukraine. Even if it were available, the money wouldn't turn the tide of the war. Rather, it was a gesture from Washington that the US isn't out of the game, despite House Republican leadership holding up roughly $60 billion in military aid for months. Okay, so unfortunately, that money ain't going to be spent on new stuff because it had already been apportioned previously. That's a real shame there. Now, a US combat nurse with Ukraine's army has told Business Insider that her guys on the front line are powerless as long as Congress denies them weapons. And this is the idea that people are cognizant on the front line that, you know, their fate is in the hands, their lives are in the hands of Congress people who are arguing to toss over crap and still not allowing that aid package to go through Congress. It is an absolute political disgrace. There's no other way of seeing it. Right. Colby Badwa has stated that US Department of Defense has signed an undefinitized contract action with General Dynamics Ordnance and Tactical Systems Canada to expand production capacity of M31A2 propellant at their Valleyfield, Quebec factory. So this is the idea that things are still happening under the radar in the US in terms of putting contracts out, securing the manufacturing of stuff, but it's just that it can't be officially given to Ukraine. M31A2 is used in M232A1, M232A2, 155mm modular artillery charge systems. This expansion will further enable the US to support Ukraine with the artillery ammunition it needs. It's very unfortunate, says Colby Badwa as a Canadian, that Prime Minister Trudeau continues to refuse to make these investments with the Canadian government's own funds. So, yeah, there is that happening. Very good news. More donations for the agriculture sector were announced today. It says exits. I'm hoping to interview her at some point. It's on the cards. It's been for some time. Japan transferred Komatsu made black hose to the Ukrainian Ministry of Agriculture in total, more than 90 construction and utility vehicles will be donated by Japan. This is really good news and will hopefully help out the construction sector, but it seems that agricultural sector is what Japan's looking to help the most here. They are part of, is it the Arise scheme, where they're, as I reported yesterday, providing a load of assistance to Ukrainian agricultural industries. Iceland, who don't have an army, so Iceland, that country out in the North Atlantic, will allocate about 2 million euros to the Czech initiative to purchase ammunition for the Ukrainian army. I mean, it's not the biggest amount of money, but that will certainly help. And that was stated on the website of the government of Iceland. And here, the British ambassador to the US, Dame Karen Pierce, says that the UK is working with the Czechs on their initiative to procure artillery ammunition for Ukraine. So the UK is part of that Czech initiative. I don't think it's been previously disclosed, says Colby Badwa. She did not elaborate on how they were participating or offer a monetary figure being committed, but that is significant. And Prime Minister Shmyhal has announced, the Ukrainian Prime Minister, that Ukraine has received $880 million from the IMF, International Monetary Fund, marking the third tranche of financial support under the EFF Extended Fund facility. It's not the organisation that Tom Cruise works for, Mission Impossible, just in case you were wondering. These funds will be allocated to cover priority budget expenditures and uphold microfinancial stability. Ukraine remains committed to fulfilling its obligations to its partners and is already gearing up for the next review of the programme. So that's going to really help them big time. And here we have the UK defence update talking about the plans for the Russian army, or plans for Shoigu to create 2 new armies. So they state in, I think, today's update, 25th, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu announced then on the 20th of March 2024 that Russia will create 2 new armies, actually that's yesterday, 2 new armies in 2024. They will reportedly be formed of 14 divisions and 16 brigades. The exact type, location and composition of these units was not stated, though a mix including mechanised armoured artillery and logistics is most likely. It is a realistic possibility that these new formations are linked to previous new unit announcements and planned brigade to division uplifts. Given Russia's successful recruitment efforts, it is likely that the units can be sufficiently staffed. However, and this is what I've been saying recently, that even though they've got a big pool of people to pull on, do they have the equipment and really decent training facilities to process and equip these people? However, given Russia's limited training, widespread use of legacy equipment, and infrastructure issues, it is likely these units will suffer similar resourcing problems. So, Russia might be threatening with huge numbers of people, but how well will they be equipped and trained? Now, this is, I think, super significant, and this is just fresh out. So, onto geopolitical stuff here. The Polish Foreign Ministry has stated that NATO is considering shooting down Russian missiles near its borders, according to the Deputy Foreign Minister of Poland. He noted that the violation of Polish airspace by a Russian missile this weekend, so 39 seconds of an 800 kilometer an hour cruise missile, meant that it travelled over I calculated that to be somewhere between 8 and 10 kilometers of Polish land. Or imagine having a land force travelling over 10 kilometers of Polish land with 600 troops in, and just sitting back and going, well, we're not going to attack it because could cause a bit of a ruckus. So what, are you just allowing them to use Poland to attack Ukraine? Well, that's the same as allowing Russia to use Polish airspace to attack Ukraine. It's my position, and so it needs to be dealt with. And here I think they've had a big think about this, and the idea is that, well, he noted, the Deputy Foreign Minister, that this weekend was a test of the strength of the defence and vigilance of the Polish armed forces. Quote, NATO is analysing different concepts, including that such missiles should be shot down when they are very close to the NATO border, but this should happen with the consent of the Ukrainian side. The Ukrainian side are going to be like, yeah, you go for it. And by the way, that area that you can, little corridor that you can use your NATO missiles to shoot down Russian missiles. We're just going to expand that corridor by about, I don't know, 3,000 kilometers, 5,000 kilometers. If you can shoot those into Russia, that'd be cool. Uh, anyway, this should happen with the consent of the Ukrainian side and taking into account international consequences. Bit vague there. In this case, NATO missiles would hit Russian missiles outside the territory of the alliance treaty, Deputy Minister said. This is huge. On the night of March 24th at 4:23 a.m., as mentioned, one of the missiles launched by Russia's long-range aviation violated Polish airspace. A missile entered Polish airspace near the village of Ozerdal and I probably pronounced that incorrectly, in the Lublin voivodeship. It stayed there for 39 seconds. I've said before that Russia will use, says Anton Gerashchenko, different ways to poke NATO and look at its reaction. Russia might not want to attack NATO directly. It will be happy if NATO just breaks down. Is NATO becoming aware of that threat? Interesting. And here we have, and this has just come out, the Russian Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev answered the question about who was behind the terrorist attack in Krakow City Hall. ISIS or Ukraine, says a reporter. Of course, Ukraine. Who needs investigations when you've got fanatical beliefs? I mean, there is the official government response that it's Ukraine's fault. And as I had a right old whinge in the last video, we need to be doing something about this. It's great to see BBC Verify. I like BBC Verify, but it's like this needs to be amplified. This needs to be thrown out there. So BBC Verify do a really good job of debunking false information. And here they take the Moscow attack and debunk all the false claims. I'm not going to go through this. I just want to highlight this to you and ask you to go and check this out. So what the first accusations were: fake claim of responsibility, window for crossing, the idea that they were going to cross into Ukraine. What do we know about the suspects, and how reliable is ISIS's claim of responsibility? So on and so forth. So really good that kind of work is being done by this is the arm of the British government, effectively BBC to some degree. And like I said before, we need to have a strategic approach to messaging where we get our news organisations to amplify truths, not making stuff up, propaganda, but amplify truths to fight back against Russian amplified disinformation. We need to inform, and we need to have the people of our nations who are voting in elections coming up informed about their decisions with truth and accuracy. The Kiev Independent says the Kremlin's relentless escalation of this war and of, well, they don't say this, actually this is, well, they do, it's Roland Freudenstein in an op-ed. The Kremlin's relentless escalation of the war and of oppression at home has convinced Macron that peace with Russia under Putin is impossible and that Ukraine has to win. And that's exactly right. I think Macron has had this like road to Kiev moment where he has changed course. Indeed, French TV channel LCI TV, although Thierry was telling me the other day there's some Russian sympathies among this TV channel. But anyway, France could clash directly with Russia if the Ukrainian front collapses. LCI TV channel has published a number of possible scenarios for sending French soldiers to Ukraine. First, construction of military factories in Ukraine under the supervision of French engineers. That's something that's very possible, given that France is now going to be investing quite heavily, it seems, or at least somewhat, in the production of munitions within Ukraine's borders. Second, the French military carries out demining and training of the AFU, something that's very possible. NATO forces training inside Ukraine, NATO member forces, not necessarily NATO forces themselves, forces of NATO nations. I think some people have said that is highly unlikely that they will train. It will be really useful because actually it's logistically very inefficient to gather up all Ukrainian troops and send them to places like Poland and the UK. It would be much easier if they got trained within Ukraine, but you would have to have you would have to bring not only French troops in to do that, in this case, or NATO troops, you would have to bring in air defences to protect those troops. And that's the thing, it's a lot more complicated than one might think. Right, third, the defence of Odessa, where the French may be involved in installing an air defence system, which already means direct participation in the conflict as an ally of Kyiv. Fourth, creation of a defense zone where the military will take over some of the tasks of the Ukrainian army. Interesting. I presume that means more like literally fighting in an area where Allied forces would take control of, say, I don't know, the Dnipro River or Kupiansk area or something like that. Fifth, direct participate. Or no, actually, no, maybe not. That could be creation of a defense zone. So actually, that's more to do with logistics and maybe in line with training, logistics, taking control over maybe an area of an oblast or maybe Odessa city or something like that. I don't know, and creating a defense zone where the French troops would be responsible for defending. And then the fifth one is that direct participation in hostilities against Russian troops on the side of Ukraine, which could lead to World War III. So obviously that latter one is the least likely scenario. Journalists emphasise scenarios 4 and 5 can only be considered if the Ukrainian front collapses. This is World War III. I agree it is already. Ukraine and Sweden discussed deepening cooperation in the nuclear industry to enhance energy security. So this is the idea that Rosatom has such a prominent role that it plays in I guess, Europe as a whole. They need to get their own, what is it? What's Ukraine? No, I can't remember the Ukrainian nuclear energy entity. Nonetheless, they need to be independent of Russia and working to keep Ukraine's nuclear energy industry working and provision maintained. They highlighted achievements like using Western-made fuel in Soviet reactors. Both parties aimed to reduce Russia's dominance in the European nuclear fuel market. Ukraine emphasized nuclear energy's role in ensuring energy stability during wartime. Sweden plans to develop both renewable and nuclear energy, seeing potential collaboration with Ukraine in this area. Excellent stuff. Now, the Polish minister talks on the licensing system for Ukrainian goods may finish this week. There's all this talk that's trying to stop the blockades at the borders. Talks on creating a licensing system for trading Ukrainian goods have progressed and may be completed already this week, Poland's Economic Development and Technology Minister has said in a comment on radio. The negotiations specifically concern cereals, rapeseed corn, sugar, poultry, eggs, soft fruits, and apples. Right. This is Gabrielius Landsbergis from Lithuania just being an absolute legend, going around and saying some very important things in a number of places. We'll play his Fox appearance in a second, but this is for the Hudson Institute.
And the last number that I want to share with you. So before the Second World War, Great Britain had a spending of 4% of their GDP towards defense. During the war, they had spending of 40% of their GDP towards defense. So it gives you an idea why it is cheaper and more efficient to win in Ukraine rather than a couple years later be spending 10 times the amount that we could have spent this year in order to win in Ukraine so that we would be defending and winning in NATO.
You've got to spend more now to spend less later. And it's great to see him on Fox News. This is the sort of place that he needs to be to speak to the right people.
We had this violation of Polish airspace. What are your concerns about that? And are you confident NATO will protect Lithuania and the other allies?
Well, I have to remind that this is not the first time that this is happening. There have been a number of violations of airspace in Romania, and this is not the first time that Polish airspace was violated. So you could tell that one time is a mistake, but if we allow that to happen, it sounds like an invitation. So we have to change our position, we have to change our posture, and send a very clear message that if it happens again, the missiles, the drones, they will be taken down.
You are meeting with Secretary of State Tony Blinken tomorrow. What are your hopes for that meeting?
Well, I have to convey the anxieties of people from the eastern flank and Lithuania. And we're really worried what is going to happen. And just mere narratives or wishful thinking is not enough. This is not what we have to do. We cannot tell that Ukrainians did some good job, because they did, but still war is far from over, and we're still far from winning. And we need to get our act together. from both sides of the Atlantic, and we're ready to do our part on the eastern flank. We're very serious about this. We're spending 2.77% this year of GDP towards our defense. We have plans to even go beyond 3%. Our neighbor Poland is already at 4%. And we're really doing as much as we can, but we need our allies with us in order to stop Putin, to save Ukraine, and to secure the eastern flank of NATO.
Gabrielis Landsbergis, thank you so much for coming in. It's great to have you, sir.
Thank
Safe
you.
travels.
Thank you.
And of course, his allies, he really means the US there. And of course, what's going on in the US is a challenge in Congress. This is an excerpt from The Bulwark, which is a podcast, a conservative podcast. So I'm trying to get you started. I'm not trying to just shout with my liberal megaphone at you, right? This is opinion coming from, albeit they're not fans of Trump. Definitely not fans of Trump. So this is like anti-Trump but conservative opinion. And this is talking about the possibility of Ukraine aid coming. So initially talking about the rinsing that Mike Johnson has had off fellow Republicans recently.
For the way he rehabbed Trump after January 6th, that they were like, we're not going to lift a finger to help you. But like now.
So this is, sorry, actually, he's talking about whether Democrats would come to the aid of Mike Johnson because they didn't like him before for many reasons, and like him now, but actually they might come to his aid so he doesn't get vacated for the good of bipartisan work in getting stuff done.
Because of Ukraine, because of some of the issues, and you already saw Tom Suozzi, for example, and some others speak out and say, okay, like if Mike comes to the table, we'll deal.
Yeah. Well, and if
the question is
Mike
there
Johnson,
enough pressure on him to actually deal? That like so that is where you're more bearish. I want to get Bill after this, but you're actually on the hill. But so like, is Mike Johnson? Does he want to deal with the Democrats on Ukraine?
I am of the belief that Ukraine funding is this cycle's Scalia seat, in that it won't be decided until after there's an election, one way or another, because they don't want, like, if they were going to strike some kind of deal, they would have done it already. There's already a standalone aid package that's passed the Senate that also like knifes progressives because it has so much Israel funding in it. But they don't want to do that. I don't think anyone other than Democrats and like a few hawks maybe in the Republican side want to do it, but they're not taking any action to do it. There's the 2 discharge petitions, one of which includes border funding, and it has like 12.5 signatures now.
This is actually important. I want to get to Bill's thought on this in a second, but let's just explain for people. So the 2 discharge petitions, the discharge petition allows members to bring something to the floor that is not brought by the leadership, the speaker, right? Okay. So there are 2 out there. One is kind of a quasi mirror of the Senate deal that had border funding in it, but it also includes like less monetary aid to Ukraine. It's just more military aid. And then the other one is just a straight aid discharge petition.
The other one is just like a copy of what passed the Senate, which is just straight up Israel, Taiwan, Ukraine funding.
And so who is for which? Why are there 2?
So there's like 180-ish Democrats on the straight up foreign aid funding. And then Ken Buck signed it on his way out the door. So that signature still holds, even though he's resigned, because it's a discharge petition requires of all of the seats. So it has to be 218 no matter what, even if 218 isn't technically the majority in the House right now. So that signature still holds. He's the only Republican on it. But then you have this Fitzpatrick one where all of like the moderate Republicans have signed on to it, like Mike Lawler.
There's some air quotes there for people that are just doing this on audio.
Yeah, like the so-called moderate members, they have signed on to this. And I think that the existence of the Fitzpatrick one, which has far less chance of passing because it has a border component, because it hasn't even gone through the Senate yet, it gives these so-called moderate Republicans an out, because they can sign that one without having to sign the existing one that most Democrats and Ken Buck have signed.
I've played that because that's super important. So the fact that there are 2 discharge petitions gives, as he says, so-called moderate Republicans the ability to sign their one and feel like they have done enough for Ukraine, or feel like they've done their bit for Ukraine. Well, look, I signed that discharge petition. You know what I feel about Ukraine. I've signed that. there you go, but not signed the Democrat one, which is just basically is a is the bill that's been passed by Senate, so it's bipartisan, and it has, well, yeah, it's just that bipartisan bill that's been passed by Senate, and so therefore, yeah, it doesn't look good for either of those petitions getting through, of course.
All right, happy
And
warrior, Bill
that's
Crystal.
why I think.
Or do you have any
anywhere.
more positive thoughts? And you are talking to people in this space like that are, I think, maybe a little more hopeful that some deal could be reached on the Ukraine funding. Where are you on that?
Yeah, well, the people who follow Ukraine closely are very hopeful and very exercised that some deal be reached, which is so important to get the funding. But every time I talk to Joe, he brings me back to earth and explains that it's, as you say, it's probably less likely to happen than I hope it would, and sometimes talk myself into thinking it would. It is so unbelievably, if I could just editorialize for 20 seconds,
Please.
so unbelievably irresponsible. Not
This is so on point, by the way. It's like I want it to. I hope it, like I look at it and think, well, yeah, surely, because you're bringing your own baggage to that, thinking, well, of course, sane people are going to vote this through because we so desperately need it. The world needs it, and then I just can't believe it's not going to get through. I can't believe we're in this position. What is going on?
to pass it. I mean, if you believe in it, and it's unbelievably irresponsible. And there are some Republicans who believe in it, and some senior Republicans, chairman of House Foreign Relations and so forth, and also younger ones who are, genuinely care about defending freedom and defeating Putin. And the idea that they're sort of paralyzed and they can't sign the Democratic discharge petition. A few of them will sign Fitzpatrick's, but then that's not going to get to 218. That they can't actually sit down and work it out. Marjorie Taylor Greene gets to threaten Mike Johnson. They don't seem to be able to exercise any leverage. The Republicans who do care about Ukraine on Speaker Johnson. Maybe they will. Maybe this gives them a chance. Maybe they go to the Democrats and say, "Look, we will." And the Democrats go to Johnson and say, "We're not going to save you if there are 2 or 3 votes, which is all it would take, right, to vacate the chair, unless you bring Ukraine
Isn't it
to
2
the floor."
now?
Yeah.
2 votes to vacate the chair.
It's going to be 1 when Gallagher's gone.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're gonna get to Gallagher in a second. I'm with you. It is extremely irresponsible. It's insane, frankly. And not only are there supposedly some Republicans that believe in it, but we had a guest last week that was sharing with me that there were some Republicans who want to go even further than Joe Biden and wanted to fund Ukraine more. And so, why aren't those people doing anything? Where are they if they exist? Okay, Joe. One more on just the fundamentals here. So we also have the shutdown hanging over all of this, which is a separate budget thing from Ukraine. So and MTG's stated complaints were more about that, right? Were more about the budget deal than about Ukraine. So is it possible that the budget deal will also?
I think that's well on its way, actually, to finally being resolved 6 months out from the end of the fiscal year. But Marjorie Taylor Greene had all these kind of random complaints about the budget deal. It has gender studies, it has woke components, things that no one actually cares about. But then I think her big issue is doing something going forward, because once the budget's done, like Johnson has said, we have to get our budget done, and once we do that, we can address other issues. The next hot issue coming up has to be Ukraine funding. And if she can get that secure, that they're not going to do it, then
got it.
That's her win.
Okay.
So that's the situation. And from these guys are kind of prevailing, reading the tea leaves as these guys are doing, is not looking great for any Ukraine funding getting done before the election, although the next big one, if they do, with the proper agreement of keeping the government open and so on and so forth, that would naturally be Ukraine funding. So there's your opportunity. And the Democrats and some Republicans, and this was a really interesting point, that those Republicans who care a lot about Ukraine, and they were saying that they've spoken to Republicans who care so much about Ukraine, they want to give more aid than the Democrats are trying to give. And I said this previously, if you genuinely, if it isn't just about the border as it was, if you genuinely believe that Ukraine is the right way forward, then you would be arguing that Biden's administration should be doing more. But we don't hear that at all from Republicans. And but there are some apparently who do believe that. So where are they, and where is their leverage on? So these people and Democrats can go to Mike Johnson and say, look, we'll keep you in your seat by not voting to vacate you, and that will be contingent upon you putting this Ukraine bill to the floor. But then is he just going to go away and create some other new Ukraine bill, which is, again, a watered-down version, which, again, speaks to that Ukraine doesn't really mean that much to Mike Johnson. He wants to water it down and change it in some way to make it less powerful, that aid, than it presently is. It's really frustrating. Russia is supplying oil directly to North Korea, defying UN sanctions in a potential arms for oil trade, according to satellite images obtained by the Financial Times. And we go back to Russia aren't even in the UN, and they're not even in the UN Security Council, based on that video that I did with Talaria. Go and check one of my last live streams where we discuss exactly why Russia aren't in the UN. They're not officially in the UN, and yet they are, by just asserting that they are. Anyway, they should be not even kicked out. That it should be ratified and validated that they aren't even in, and then you can't do these vetoes and whatnot. But anyway, if Russia claim that they are in the UN and on the UN Security Council, they're doing a pretty good job of defying UN sanctions by providing oil for weapons with North Korea. And there has to be some ramifications about this. Now, going back to the information space, says Jane Kiev here, Russia's paid influencers are already prepping the informational destabilization for its inevitable invasion of the Baltics. So, a few hours ago, she posted, this is a Russian influencer here, she posted a video in which she said that Latvia is a fake country that was founded in 1918 and has almost never been free, and now it's free, but from the brains. Does it sound familiar? She called Latvians slaves who don't have a past, and she has completely forgot what that the Nazis weren't the first to occupy Latvia during World War II. The Soviets did it, and then the Nazis came, and then the Soviets reoccupied the country. Imagine if the Latvian government let her stay in the country. I mean, this is the sort of stuff that takes place, which is the laying of the foundations in the information space to build ideas upon. And you normalize these discussions by having people put those ideas out there and seeping its way into people's consciousnesses. And then when you say it in government, it's not so crazy because that Overton window is moved, and people are these ideas have been normalized. And that's why I keep harking back to this idea that we are losing the information battle. What are we doing about it? The ruling Georgian dream. So, you're looking at the Baltics here being under threat, and then look at Georgia in the Caucasus. The ruling Georgian Dream Party proposed legislation on March 25th to significantly crack down on LGBTQ plus rights in the country, in a move that analysts compared to similar laws passed in Russia. The proposal, which was put forth by Mamuka Mnadradze, the leader of Georgia Dream's faction in parliament, is the latest in a series of government measures to aim to restrict the rights of LGBTQ plus people in Georgia. Now, you might sit anywhere and what your views are to inclusivity and diversity and the right to sexual freedom. But if you believe in freedom, right, people should have the right to, I would have thought, as long as it has no moral implications, and that's where the grey zone is for many people. But if it has no moral implications on people, then you should be free to do that. So, right, that kind of stuff aside, let's look at the practicalities here. Or not the practicalities, the kind of form. So this is low-hanging fruit for a government that is trying to move towards authoritarianism. And this is, I don't want to talk about America, let's just talk about Russia and Europe. In terms of what Russia have done in moving towards more restrictive authoritarian, I would argue dictatorship, this is precisely what they've done in mobilizing, if you like, the Orthodox Russian Church to talk about traditional values and then restrict the ability to do stuff. When you have diversity, you don't have conformity. What you want as a dictator is a population to conform. Think of like 1984. Think of kind of Animal Farm. Think of this Orwellian dystopian future that was a reality in Soviet Russia, right, in the Soviet Union, where you want to control your population. You don't want to allow for people to have the freedom to be who they want to be, for people to express themselves in ways that aren't exactly what you want. And you control a population if you can conform them to unitary values or identities. Right? It's like you mold them to what you want them to be, and then you manipulate them. But if you're allowing people to have freedom, you're allowing them to have power. And if you're allowing them to be like that, I mean, that's great in a free and democratic nation. But if you're trying to be a dictator with ultimate power, this is exactly what you don't want. So clamping down on sexual expression is just one element of what authoritarians do in order to control their population. So be under no illusions that Georgia is attempting to go down that route. This is the canary in the coal mine. Right? That's what this is. So I don't care what your views on homosexuality are and the rights to sexual expression. You can be against that. You can be the most traditionalist you like. However, you've got to understand that this is about authoritarianism as opposed to freedom. Georgia Dream previously paid lip service to being Western looking and EU looking, wanting to accede to the EU, but they've increasingly become under the sphere of influence of their Russian overlords. And I think this is just another indication that Russia is pulling the strings with Georgia Dream. Okay, moving on. Just a couple of extra things to keep you worried about what's going on around the world and how we're all going to hell in a handcart. Because, of course, no, I don't want to be too alarmist, but it's now open season on US allies as America is now considered a global joke, says Jan Kiev as an American. That you might disagree with that. Unable to act against Putin's global terror coalition. While the Chinese Coast Guard is now attacking the Philippines Coast Guard ships with water cannons, the collateral damage from throwing Ukraine under the bus continues to expand. This idea that China is flexing its muscles in the Indo-Pacific as a result of the collective West's lack of resolve with regard to Ukraine, or particularly the US in this case. And meanwhile, security situation in Pakistan is getting very grim. 2 big attacks on Pakistani military in Balochistan in just under a week, and today an attack being reported on the Chinese in northern Pakistan. So just thought I'd let you know it's all going well everywhere. Anyway, thank you for watching. Please take care. Like, subscribe and share and do all that normal stuff as I hope you do. I really appreciate your support. Toodle pips.